polling rates for dummies that have no idea what they're talking about. There's outrage in the community right now because of Microsoft not allowing any higher than a 250 Hz polling rate on console. But here's why you need to chill, and hopefully you'll have a better understanding of polling rates and what they actually mean and whether they should actually matter to you or not. Most gaming controllers are offered with a 1000 Hz polling rate now, which is definitely what we want to be seeing, but this is only possible on PC. Some popular options such as the GameSir G7 Pro, GameSir Cyclone 2, Mojang Blitz 2. In fact, the Mojang Blitz 2 has a 2000 Hz polling rate. In fact, the Sony DualSense has an 8000 Hz polling rate. But you connect the GameSir G7 Pro or the Sony DualSense Edge to a console, whether it be Xbox Series X or PS5, that's not what you're going to be getting. It's going to be maximum 250 Hz. And so it's pretty simple, right? The bigger number is better. 1000 is better than 250. And you're not wrong. But should you be mad about it? Most of the hate is on Microsoft because they're not allowing GameSir and other manufacturers to use 1000 Hz on Xbox console, but Sony's exactly the same. And before you jump right into the comments section, I'm just going to let you know that going into the PS5 settings and changing the controller connectivity from wireless to USB connection doesn't enable a 1000 Hz polling rate or anything higher than 250 Hz. It's still 250 Hz, and there's no controller that you can get for your PS5 that offers anything more than that. Lots of people do get confused about this, but should we be starting worldwide petitions and protests in the street to get Microsoft and Sony to allow more than a 250 Hz polling rate? Not really. I don't think it's a useful way of spending our time. Number one, because it's just not going to happen. But number two, I don't actually think it's necessary. And let me tell you why. So to better understand polling rates, a 1000 Hz polling rate means that the controller, or what the controller is connected to, checks for input values 1000 times per second. So 250 Hz is 250 times per second. In 1 second, we have 1000 milliseconds. So if you've got a polling rate of 1000 Hz, the PC is checking the controller for inputs 1000 times per second. We can expect the input latency to be about 1 millisecond per input. And the same goes for 250 Hz, so 250 times per second would be about, on average, 4 milliseconds per input, of course. But it's not quite that simple. Again, if you are a bit of a nerd on this thing, this video is probably not going to be very useful to you because I am going to be dumbing things down, putting them super simply, in a way that almost anybody, the average Joe, can understand. So if you're looking for all the nerdy details, then this is probably not the video. This video is more for people that are a little bit short on brain cells. No offense. But to help you better understand, I want you to focus on what I said. 1 millisecond per input, 4 milliseconds per input. Now there's more to a controller's input latency than that, and it's down to how the controller actually processes all of those inputs and how well it kind of sends the information. And you've got to bear in mind that when you're using a controller, it's actually very rare that you're sending one input from the controller at a time. Most of the time you're sending several, sometimes up to 10 or 15 inputs all at once. The position of the joystick on the X and Y axis. You may be also pressing the A button at the same time, maybe also holding both triggers down at the same time. So that's like 6 or 7 inputs. And that's quite a bit of information that the controller's got to process on board and then send to the PC or console. So regardless of whether a controller's actually got a 1000 Hz polling rate or not, one controller with 1000 Hz compared to another with 1000 Hz could have more latency than the other. For example, FlyDigi's Vader 4 Pro has a polling rate of 1000 Hz. Scuff's Envision Pro has a polling rate of 500 Hz, which is half of that of the FlyDigi. However, the input latency is actually lower on the controller with 500 Hz compared to 1000 Hz. How is that even possible? Well, I can't tell you exactly, but for an example, this could be down to the quality of the switches, it could be the quality of the cable, it could be the chipset on the controller itself that's processing all the information and sending it where it needs to go. So even a controller with a 1000 Hz polling rate can have a little bit more on its plate than it's really designed for. This is why most pro Call of Duty players end up using DualShock 4 controllers or DualSense controllers because they've got a pretty good reputation of having the lowest input latency, which is more ideal for that genre of gaming. So again, 1000 hertz doesn't automatically mean 1 millisecond response times, because it can be higher than that. You can check out all the differences between different controllers that all have a 1000 hertz polling rate over at Gamepad LA. I'll go ahead and link that in the description for you so you can go and check it out. And most of the controllers that you'll see at the top of the list, if you sort it from lowest input latency to highest, all of the controllers you're seeing all have a 1000 hertz polling rate, but some are slower than others. But let's get back to consoles and talk about that. So the reason why I don't necessarily think 1000 hertz polling rates on consoles are particularly important is simply because the console's system latency itself is so high compared to PC that you almost won't even notice it. Some people have claimed that they've used GameSir controllers on older versions of firmware, been able to find a loophole and use 1000 hertz on console and be able to feel the difference. But I mostly put this down to a placebo effect, and you can either agree with me or not, but there's no evidence showing otherwise. Sure, people have put a lot of effort into really putting this to the test, but there are so many variables and the information and the ways of testing is so unreliable that yes, it gives us a little bit of an idea, but still nothing is absolutely for sure. And if we just go off of what the manufacturers say that actually make the controllers and make the consoles, some things that people have found in testing shouldn't be possible. Anyway, the beauty of PCs is that you can have an uncapped FPS and just crank that shit to the max, and you can also optimize your system by uninstalling certain bloatware and programs, and if you just run the game and nothing else and make sure that your PC's resources aren't being consumed elsewhere, you can optimize your system latency to be extremely low, which is why PC gaming is always the preferred way of gaming, especially in 2025, whereas consoles are a little bit different. Most consoles now, to achieve a 4K resolution, use frame generation. Frame generation brings its own input latency, and in some cases, especially for some titles, it can be quite high. If you are a PC gamer, then go ahead and launch a game that you normally wouldn't use frame generation on, enable frame generation and FSR, because that's what consoles actually use, and then tell me that you can't tell the input latency. It will add quite a bit of noticeable input latency, and consoles have these options turned on. That's what they're utilizing to achieve these resolutions and frame rates, and there's no way of actually turning them off. So you're stuck with that regardless. So saving 2 to 3 milliseconds off of how quickly your controller responds, I think is a very, very, very small thing, and to me isn't a game changer. Sure, there are controllers out there like Scuff's Instinct Pro, Microsoft's Elite Series 2, even standard Xbox controllers that do have quite high latency even when using them with a wired connection, and you can certainly get a controller that is faster than that, on average between 3 and 6 milliseconds faster. But that's where we kind of draw the line in possibility. And even on PC, when you're using a controller that's set at like 500 hertz and then you change it to 1000 hertz, the amount of humans that are gonna actually be able to tell the difference physically while gaming is very, very little. You're talking a difference of 1 millisecond. Yes, so from going from 500 hertz to 1000 hertz, your controller is at most going to respond about 1 millisecond faster. All right, let's put it to the test. Everybody, count with me. We're going to count to 1 millisecond. Ready? 3, 2. Yeah, it's just not even something that you can even count to. Now, from 125 hertz to 250 hertz, that is a much bigger difference. On average, a 4 millisecond faster response time. So, yes, GameSir controllers are definitely worth buying for your Xbox console, even if that means that you can't use 1000 hertz. And just try not to spend too much time trying to achieve that or looking too much into it, because as I've tried to explain in the rest of the video, it's not a game changer. Unless you're a competitive pro Call of Duty player. I mean, I was watching some of Team Optic playing on Xbox consoles in a video the other day, and quite a few times they did mention, wow, this Xbox stuff is really, really does make a difference, because they were playing on Xbox consoles instead of usually PCs. So at home, they play on PCs, and then when they go and play in the tournaments, they also play on PCs with very low latency optimized systems. So when they jumped on console, yes, they were feeling the difference, but again, they weren't probably really talking about 1 millisecond on the controllers. They were more talking about the overall system latency due to frame generation and other processes. So quit crying about it, stop sending emails to Microsoft, and again, stop focusing on Microsoft being the problem as well, because again, like I've said, Sony and even Nintendo are all in the same game, and I think one of them isn't going to make the move to introduce higher polling rates on consoles without kind of the whole gang doing the same thing. Because, yes, 1000 hertz for a competitive advantage will be quite big compared to 250 hertz. So, if Xbox were to allow 1000 hertz polling rates but Sony didn't, technically Xbox would be the superior console without question for competitive gaming. And that would hurt Sony's brand quite a bit. So if Xbox are going to do it, Sony need to do it. If Sony's going to do it, Xbox need to do it, and they both need to do it at the exact same time. Nintendo can probably get away with their 66 hertz Joy-Con polling rate, as it's a different kind of gaming. Although we do have some titles that are cross-platform that include the Switch and the Switch 2, it's not many, and it's usually not on a competitive level either. But Sony and Microsoft, absolutely, they need to be on the same page with this. They can't be offering competitive advantages from one console to another. Sure, PlayStation 5, you can stream to YouTube and you can use USB audio devices. And sure, Xbox might have the more powerful console and get slightly more FPS, and the clarity of the game might be a little bit better. And with Xbox, you benefit from Game Pass. With all the cross-platform compatibility that we've got now, it's a very tricky situation. So yeah, stop moaning about it, plug your controller in and just play some freaking games. I hope this did give you a better understanding of polling rates, and I do think the community has blown polling rates way out of proportion. If you do want the absolute lowest latency possible and you want to utilize everything you can out of these little controllers that are coming out this year, then switch to PC, because you're not just going to benefit with the controller latency, you're going to benefit with everything else. That's all the yapping from me today. We'll catch you in the next one. Ciao.